want to talk particularly about one of the resources which was instrumental, and I highly recommend it. Hello, welcome back to Privacy Professional Training. I'm Fumi. Today's video, we're going to be talking about how I passed the CISSP examination. So grab a cup of tea because this one is going to be longer than the privacy certifications. The first thing I want to say is that the CISSP exam is offered by the ISC², that is the certifying body, and you need to be able to understand the 8 different domains for the CISSP exam. The second thing I want to say about the CISSP exam is it does have prerequisites. So unlike the privacy exams where once you take the exam, you get the designation. For example, you take the CIPP-US exam and then you get the designation, immediately you pass. The CISSP exam requires you to have 5 years of experience in order to get the designation after your name. So I'm currently in year 4. I took this exam in 2021. So for next year, I will then apply for the designation because I would have met that prerequisite of 5 years of experience in the security arena. Now, the next thing that I want to say is that the exam itself is $795 and you can book for the exam on the ISC² website. What I really want to talk about in this video is how I passed it and the resources I used. Because here at Privacy Professional Training, we want everybody to pass their privacy and security exams. Now, you might be wondering, why are we talking about security exams for privacy professional training? The reason is because privacy and security are adjacent to one another. And what I mean by adjacent is there's always the influence of the security team on the privacy team. So when you start working on a privacy program, you will be in close liaison with security. Now, it really does depend on the organization or client that you're providing services to, but ultimately you are always going to be interacting with security because security and privacy work hand in hand. Now, security really looks at asset protection. And what I mean by asset is things like computers, hard drives, cloud storage. That's really what security looks at. Privacy looks at the protection of personal data. Now, in order for you to protect personal data, you need to be able to store your personal data in an asset, which is why privacy and security always work hand in hand. And one of the reasons I took the CISSP exam is because I would help clients with product launches. So they might come to me and they might say, hey, we want to build an application, or we're planning on bringing in a new system and we need to integrate it with an old system. I took the CISSP so that I could understand the terminology that the product team were providing to me and also be able to provide my expertise on data protection matters as it pertains to this new asset. So an application would be considered an asset. It's something that has a repository for personal data. Now let's talk about the resources I used. I'm just going to quickly look at my notes. So I used a number of resources. The substantive books that I read was the Sean book, the Chapel book, and the 11th Hour CISSP book. And I will leave a link to those 3 books below. Now, how I personally study is I set myself a goal, and I'm going to share with you guys the master plan that I created for myself. So I made this schedule on January 21st, 2021. I gave myself 52 days to pass the CISSP exam. So when I was looking at the Sean book, I found out that it had 966 pages. Now, bear in mind, this was 4 years ago. It may be that they've updated the number of pages or the edition. Obviously, security changes and evolves, and I'm pretty sure that the security books and the examination has evolved since this time. But I'll still leave a link to the most current version of the Sean book. And then for the Chapel book, it was 1,000 pages. So to cover all 8 domains that you need to cover for the CISSP exam, the Chapel book at the time had 1,000 pages, so I wrote that down. The 3rd book, the 11th Hour CISSP book, has 200 pages. And the reason I wrote the pages down is because I talked about this for other certifications I've taken. I always provide a day minimum on how many pages I need to read, because how I learn best is reading things over and over again and then creating an outline based on the things that I know. So I wrote the pages down because I'd given myself 52 days and I needed to make sure that I've read these books through within that allotted time. The next sort of resources that I used were past questions, and I have created questions for the people that are taking the CISSP exam. You can check that in the description below, but the questions I used at the time, this was prior to me creating any resources, was the Boston questions. There were 750 questions. I used the Chapel questions. There was 1,300 questions. I used the Sean questions online. There were 1,200 questions. I used the Sean past questions. There were 400 questions. The CISSP there were 1,000 questions, and phone app questions 500. I will leave a link to all my resources. I'm pretty sure they still exist. So best believe I did all of those questions. And why? Because I wanted to give myself the best chance of passing. And I did pass this exam on the first instance. So all of those questions altogether, that's over 2,000 questions, right? And there's not 2,000 questions on the CISSP exam, but I wanted to make sure I had covered everything in depth. And at the time I was practicing as a privacy consultant. So security, although I have insight into security from a product standpoint, and I have insight into security when I do vendor due diligence for clients, I didn't have the in-depth knowledge that I needed to pass the examination. That's very, very important. You need to give yourself the best opportunity to pass it the first time, because these certifications are not cheap. Okay, now I want to talk about the last resource that I used. If you go onto LinkedIn, Mike Chappell, he also does CISSP prep materials. He has lectures on LinkedIn. I listened to those during my workday. Again, I work remote. I've worked remote for a number of years. So I had the opportunity to listen to these lectures back to back. And during my workday, I would spend time listening to Mike Chappell's lectures, and he has lectures for the entire exam. So if you also work remotely, you can listen to the lectures while you're working, or you can listen to it on your commute, which I'm pretty sure there's other people that have done. The last thing I will say that's not really a resource is I joined a number of Facebook groups, and I'm actually going to leave a link below because I really want you guys to pass your CISSP exam if you're preparing for it. I joined Facebook groups because people provided free resources that they'd either created or had existed in the past, and I leveraged those too. So if you want an overview of those free resources, leave a comment below and I will send it to you. That's fine. Okay, perfect. So there were some various handouts that I found in these groups. One was called Sunflower Guide, that was 38 pages. One was the CISSP Glossary, that was 49 pages. And one was Luke Ahmed's Guide, that is 51 pages. So you can see the level of prep that I put in place, because you need to prepare to win. You're not looking at one book, you're trying to look at several books to make sure that you understand all of the knowledge. And another thing I will say is that I didn't read any of the 3 main textbooks more than once, because I had 3 books and some of the knowledge overlapped, so I didn't see the need to read the book over and over. So let's talk about the time that I dedicated. I made this schedule on January 21st, 2021. The next day, I started to wake up in the morning at 5 a.m. and I would do 2 hours of reading every single day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I would set myself a goal for the books that I had. I already knew how many pages there were, so I split that up. Let's say, for example, 30 pages. I needed to read 20 to 30 pages every morning for the first 2 hours. Then Saturday and Sunday were question time, because I had over 2,000 questions that I could choose from. So I would spend Saturday and Sunday doing questions. Now, closer to the examination, I started to spend more time during the weekend. But for the month of January, I probably only spent 4 hours on a Saturday, 4 hours on a Sunday. And I would start my studies between 8 and midday, because I feel like that's the time the mind is most fresh. It would be really difficult for me to go out, enjoy myself at the weekend, and then come back around 6 and start studying. So I always made sure that I studied in the morning, because that's when my brain is most open to knowing any type of information. So I read through the books, I set myself that goal. If there were concepts that I didn't really understand, I would make a note of them, and I revisited them 2 weeks before the test. So that January 21st, 2021, that was the day that I paid for the test. I didn't book it until closer to the day, when I knew I was scoring over 80% of the questions right. Now, I want to talk particularly about one of the resources which was instrumental, and I highly recommend it. The boson questions are very, very difficult. And the first time you take them, you're going to be shocked at how hard they are. But they prepared me to succeed. And after I took the examination, I was so grateful that it was the resource that I paid for, because basically it's a download application onto your computer, and then you take the questions. There's 750 of them, and how they're worded is very difficult. The wording is very kind of complex, and it really prepares you for how hard the exam is. And if you don't buy any other resources, like apart from the textbook, buy the boson questions, because they are really very excellent. Now, how else did I prepare myself for the CISSP exam? I regularly would check the Facebook groups because there are many people that have taken the exams in the past, and it's really good to leverage community when you're taking these exams. One, because you've invested your time and energy into taking them, but two, because your money's on the line and you don't want to have to retake the test. So it's better for you to over prepare than it is for you to under prepare. Put yourself in a position where you're going to pass it the first time. And there are other people that have taken the test, so you don't have to do it alone. And another reason I really started privacy professional training was because I will continue to take privacy and security examinations because I really enjoy the space that I work in. I love the clients that I work with, and I really want to continue to grow in this field, and I want other people to join it because there is a big opportunity for growth here. I think as part of the work you do as a privacy professional, it's really important for you to understand the terminology. One, from a vendor perspective, because you're going to encounter a lot of vendors and you're going to be conducting a lot of due diligence. You need to be able to understand the products that the vendor is providing your client, and the security terminology is so helpful. Outside of the vendor due diligence, you also need to understand the product that your client has, specifically if you work in the technology space. Now, for most people that I talk to, they are working with some type of client that has a technology product. Whether it's they're creating a product or they're buying a product, technology is immensely useful in 2025. I don't know any businesses that aren't using some form of technology. So in order for you to provide good advice from a privacy perspective, you need to be able to understand the technology that your client is using, creating, or purchasing. So I studied for those 52 days and I passed the test. I just followed the schedule that I put. I'll leave it in the description below. You can tweak it based on how many days you want to study for it. My personal recommendation is don't give yourself too long because you'll get burnt out. And that's why I always set a deadline for myself on how quickly I'm going to take the exam. When I know that I'm about to take it, and I take one annually, I always give myself a deadline because one, I have client work to do, and two, I don't want to spend 6 months studying for an exam. I feel like that's how you're not able to retain the information that you need. The CISSP exam is very wide, but not in depth. If you're learning the key concepts, you put yourself in a better position to pass the amount of questions that the ISC² offers. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any other questions about the CISSP exam, leave a comment below and I will definitely answer it, and I'll see you in another video.